what is your politics around disability?
I think most people who have disabilities should be put on an island away from us normal people.
Girl, I agree.
Okay, this is where I'm going to open the show. Nobody's going to know you're playing.
My sister's opinions do not reflect
I thought we were in this together.
Maybe not an island. But let's say Andrew Leland's Country of the Blind were indeed a real place. What would be the requirements for citizenship? Is it based solely on acuity, or must you have additional qualifications? What would be some of those qualifications? What actually makes you blind? Visual acuity, orientation, and mobility skills? What if you have multiple disabilities? These questions, well, sort of, have been on my mind ever since my conversation with Andrew featured in the last episode. The actual questions I've been thinking about are more related to topics like ableism and what categorizes something as disability art or a part of disability culture. Today, continuing with my self-portrait, I'll see where these topics take me. That is, with the help of those two you heard at the top of this episode.
My name is Rihanna Reed. I'm a 26-year-old woman. I'm brown skinned. I wear rectangular glasses. I currently have my hair in a pineapple, meaning my curls are on the top of my head in like a ponytail. I have a bright smile and high cheekbones, kinda. People tell me I look like my mommy.
You look like your father.
Okay.
Rihanna's pronouns are she, her, hers. Hi everyone, my name is Raven. I'm a 20-year-old woman. I have dark skin and big, curly, fluffy hair with almond-shaped eyes and a big smile, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
I'm Thomas Reed. If this by chance is your first time listening, I'm the host and producer of this here podcast. And more importantly, I'm the father of these two young ladies. That's right, Daddy-Daughter Day in full effect. Let's go. Reed.
My mind.
Reed.
My mind.
During my conversation with Andrew, we got into a discussion about what categorizes something as disability culture. What makes someone a disabled artist? If they're in the mainstream, I don't consider that disability culture. That's just me. Are they making the art from a disability perspective? I think that's the way I draw that line.
My book is a mainstream book, like it's with a commercial publisher. I don't want to put you on the spot, but does that mean that what I'm doing is not from a disability perspective?
No. You mentioned the blind music artist. Everybody knows Stevie. That to me is a little different.
It's interesting because he has an album called Talking Book that had Braille on the cover. He's not singing about blindness in every song. It's kind of a bigger question about identity. Does your work fall under the category of the identity just by virtue of your having the identity, or does the work have to be about the identity for it to be included? I think it's kind of a spectrum.
Before we get to the question of what categorizes something as disability art specifically, let's talk about identity. A few years ago, I submitted Read My Mind Radio to a Black podcast collective. They were looking for a Black podcast to amplify. Based on the fact that I never received a response, I assumed my podcast wasn't Black enough for them. But I'm Black. How do you define Black?
From African descent.
Okay.
There are some people who have some African descent and they're not Black. Clarence Thomas, I guess he Black technically. But he probably not. I'm not Black. I am a dark complexion. I'm the same race as my wife.
We had a speaker in this club that I was in, and I just remember her saying that she doesn't use the term Black anymore because someone found it offensive, and she's African American.
Oh my God.
And
oh my God.
I don't know if I lost my mind in the moment, but every time I think about it, I lose my mind. Black people are all around the world, and I think whoever said she was offended by the term Black has her own personal issue.
At the freaking schools, they're always Black or African American. I'm like, this school district is blessed with such a beautiful Black diaspora. Half of these kids do not identify as African American, but they definitely Black.
I've had friends before be like, oh, I'm not Black then because I'm not African American. And I'm like, girl.
Because they're from the Caribbean.
Well, that's because that's what they're taught.
Could I have been rejected from that Black podcast network because I'm blind? But Stevie's blind. Ray was blind. And they're Black.
Can I talk to you for a second? What? Tina, who's your favorite basketball player?
Magic Johnson.
Who's your favorite movie star?
Eddie Murphy. Magic, Eddie, Prince. They're not black. I mean, let me explain myself. They're not really black. I mean, they're black, but they're not really black. They're more than black. It's different.
It's different?
Yeah, to me, it's different.
When I listen back to this podcast, I think it sounds black. Not just because I'm on it, not because of the music beds or the references throughout that I know those who know. It's a vibe that's in everything I do. Police see me as black. My teachers and authority figures saw me as black. But then again, if your perception of black is based on stereotypes, then okay, maybe my podcast and I don't fit. But I'm black.
I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all. I'm blickety black, blacker than black, I'm black.
There's a writer named Jim Knipfel who wrote the first book about blindness I ever read, which is a RP memoir called Slackjaw that came out in the 90s. He and I have become friends. He's sort of like a blind writing mentor for me. One day he paid me a really big compliment. He was like, Andrew, be a writer. Don't be a blind writer. You're too good of a writer to be a blind writer. And it was a compliment, but I was also like, really? Like, I don't know. I'm kind of psyched to be a blind writer.
Without knowing the exact intent behind that message, it reminds me of someone telling me I don't look or act blind, which is actually less about me and more about someone's perception of blind.
John Lee Clark, the deaf-blind poet, he had an interview in Word Gathering, the Disability Arts Journal, where he kind of said the opposite. And he was like, don't hide it. Like, that's a perspective that is going to set your work apart, a perspective to really draw from. I kind of feel the tug of both of those approaches to being an artist.
Could it be more about who is doing the defining?
I was getting a ride from a friend of mine. Honestly, I was like, at the end of the ride, I was like, are you a friend of mine? He said to me in no uncertain terms, so now that you've written this book, you got to know your audience. People really respond to hearing the story of you losing your vision. Like, that's what you need to write now. Just stay in your lane, basically. Write another book that's about losing more vision. And I was kind of like, really? Like, you knew about the career that I had before I wrote this book, but now all you can see is blindness and this kind of emotional aspect of vision loss that you see as like the moneymaker. I think that's what Jim meant by like being a blind writer as opposed to just being a writer. People could only understand you through this experience. And so to me, like, that's the pitfall. Like, that's where I agree with Jim. But then like the next book I want to write, it doesn't even have to be about vision loss, but it can be sort of from a blind perspective and using blindness in that way that I find really positive.
It's how you're being perceived is one way, and how you present yourself. Sometimes it doesn't seem to even matter. You're being pigeonholed, which is not your goal. When I started podcasts, I had this whole thing, like, I don't have to do everything about blindness, because again, that was not my intention. But along the way, I was like, wow, there's nothing wrong with me doing things about blindness. And then it broadened out to disability in general. I like this, and I can talk about everything and anything within the disability community and or from a disability perspective. I'm making that decision. It's not someone putting that on me. But at the same time, when someone wants to limit me and say, this is the only thing you can do, that's what I have a problem with, because I can do whatever the hell I want to do.
That's the question that I've been wrestling with, really, like through the whole process of writing the book and figuring out my own identity as a blind person. Is it supposed to be central, or is it supposed to be incidental? When is it central? When is it incidental?
You know what blows my mind?
What?
When I don't mention that you're blind, and it's like, oh my, how did I not know? Why didn't you tell me? Oh my God, we've been friends for so long. You didn't tell me.
What is that?
What's it gonna come up for? Yeah, my dad didn't see today. What the hell you be talking about? I don't know.
No, it's the same thing with me. They're always like shocked that I didn't share, and it's like, why would I?
I mean, you can understand why people would find that.
Not really.
No, they think it's like me sharing like a trauma or something.
That's what
and
it
it's
feels
not.
like.
It's why didn't you tell me? And that's weird.
If you go back, everything that you learn about disability in the world and how it's perceived and all of that stuff, it makes sense that people would respond like that.
That was stupid.
It is stupid.
And I also don't like it sometimes because, especially older generations, if I tell someone that my father's blind, probably because it contributed to a conversation, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
That just...
Did you knock his eyes out?
When it comes to being black or blind, I never had a choice. I'm totally blind. No eyes blind. Like, I could win a blind contest.
I'm the winner is...
Years ago, my intention was to bridge this gap between the blind community and others. It feels like a natural thing to consider, especially as someone becoming blind as an adult. Today, considering all of my identities, I'm just not interested in trying to convince others to see my humanity. I want to live a life with others who choose to recognize and appreciate people as they are, in full. I want to be seen with all of my identities, not just those we happen to share. I want to do the same for others. On the question of what makes something a part of disability culture, I think it's about intention. Who is the art made for? I think disabled artists create for disabled people. Of course, others can appreciate and find inspiration in it and interpret it based on their own lived experiences. It's art. But in my mind and my interpretation, it was made for us.
Hold up.
Hey, y'all. Shout out to all of the RMM Radio family out there who continue to put in that work. Justice Shorter, who joined us during our Young, Gifted, Black, and Disabled 2022 series, along with Seated Ground, recently launched the Disaster Justice Guidebook. This guidebook is a collection of disaster-oriented lessons, lived experiences, and learned expertise concerning people of color with disabilities. Based on 6 interviews conducted during the summer of 2023, each section is curated using the contributions of profoundly insightful individuals of color who are all well-versed in their respective areas of focus. You can find the downloadable guidebook, along with accompanying interviews, at justiceshorter.com. Big shout out to Ajani AJ Murray, who launched his podcast, Acting Up with AJ and Crew. The podcast focuses on disability in pop culture, from movie analysis and reviews to some of the latest media happenings in the disability community. AJ's got you covered. I'll link to both of these in this episode's blog post over at readmymind.com. And now, back to the episode. What is ableism?
Ableism. A-B-L.
Is it a spelling bee?
Yeah.
Ableism to me is pretty much society today, where it's set up for able-bodied people with a lack of acknowledgement for people with disabilities. I guess that's discrimination.
I feel like a lot of the isms and all of that come from just the belief that there's a normal, like that there's a normal boy and girl, and if you strip from that in any way, you need to be fixed. In terms of disabilities too, I think that's where the feeling bad comes from, because they're not living the normal life that we deemed as a society as good and easy. Even though you can live happily with whatever the cards you've been dealt.
Yeah, we just need to adjust society
Yeah.
to be more inclusive.
I can't recall hearing the word ableism prior to becoming blind. In fact, it wasn't until I eventually began reading about disability in general that I came across this word and concept. That is, the discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. That's whack. It defines people by their disability and is applicable to both individuals and systems. Like my girl said, society views disability as something requiring fixing. It's evident throughout our culture: art, politics, religion.
The refrain that the poem says over and over again is, fall to your knees and thank God for your eyesight.
This poem Andrew refers to in his book was read during a service at a synagogue.
You just sort of have to sit there with your family as like a whole room of people just sort of appreciates that they aren't blind. It was kind of wild to me that Lily found it annoying.
exciting and new.
My family and I were on a cruise, taking in one of the family-friendly comedy shows held in one of the ship's smaller theaters. It's still amazing how incredibly large these ships are, but yet they still get tossed around during stormy weather. When attending any sort of comedy show, I specifically do not sit in the front row. I don't want to be visible to the comedian. I'm there to be entertained, not part of the entertainment. We weren't in the front row, but it wasn't a large theater and I was sitting in the aisle seat. There was this one, quote, comedian. I say that because there wasn't much about his comedy at all that was funny. I could tell he was pacing from one side of the stage to the other. He then stopped in front of the aisle that I was sitting in. He took a few moments and then walked back off to the right side of the stage. I could just feel it. A blind joke was coming. It did. And it sucked. He was struggling to make something up on the fly. It was some corny, basic joke that involved Stevie, probably the most famous blind person on the planet. I didn't even tell you which Stevie, and you know who I'm talking about. Anyway, do y'all remember that? Do you have any recollection of that?
I have about 10% recollection, and I'm afraid that 9% of it is because you've told me the story about 3 times in the past week.
Literally, the only thing I remember is Daddy's story. I don't remember that happening at
Y'all don't remember that at all?
Kind of?
You're saying that he saw you in the audience and then he made a joke because he made the assumption you were blind.
I'm telling you, it was like there was an energy thing, something was going on, but it was as though we were making eye contact.
Maybe you had a dream.
Oh my God. It's like, you know when you just go somewhere and you just want to be?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? You just kind of want to just do your thing. You don't necessarily need to interact. You just want to just be there.
Yes.
That's me every day. I can see what Daddy is saying. When we go out, he has his cane, or if you're holding on to somebody's arm, people are going to look. Especially when Daddy had his eye patch, everybody was staring. There was no just being, like blending in the crowd. He stood out for sure.
Sometimes as a family, we don't necessarily always get that. And that was one of those times for me. Like, we don't get to just be.
Aww.
Did Mommy remember that?
She did. She remembers it like I remember it. She just says it was a different cruise, which I don't care. That's fine. And it was just, it was a weird thing.
A comedian saying a blind joke and not being funny on a cruise. But but I don't know what you want me to say, tell you. Besides
did it make you feel any sort of way? Was it? That's what I'm saying.
I was probably very upset, annoyed. But you have similar experiences that are all the same thing.
Yeah, well, again, we talked about it. It goes into that just being. Like, you're like, okay, we just here, we just want to have a good time like everybody, and then all of a sudden, boop, spotlight. You see what I'm saying?
Well, I don't.
And not the good spotlight where, I'm rocking the crowd. Hey, what's going on? Hello?
That makes you sad.
Why does it make you sad?
Because I don't want you to think that it's like hard to go out and be a family with your family.
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's nothing that we do wrong. It's not our fault. My thing is that I want to know how it impacts you, or do you all recognize that? And I know you do now. Rihanna has come a long way in terms of it doesn't, she knows what it is, doesn't bother. So I really feel like she's going to be better for that. She's a better person.
What? Oh, I thought you meant better than me.
No. I'm just saying, like, she's going to be better for that. And I think the same is true for you. At the end of the day, we just going to do our thing.
That's always been my thing.
And that's exactly what we were doing during that trip and in that theater. The rest of the audience around me, I could sense was aware of my presence. They seemed to be looking for my reaction. In this case, there was none. Because I didn't find it funny. I don't think they did either. Although, I'll never know if that's because they're aware of me being there, or if, as in this case, the joke just isn't funny. But that uncomfort felt by the non-blind folks, a reluctance to laugh as they await my reaction, as though if I find it funny, it absolves them from the sin of laughing at a blind joke.
That actually is pretty funny.
I was extremely aware of racial discrimination at a very young age, but I knew nothing about ableism. I know I couldn't have been ableist. I didn't have an ableist bone in my body. Do you ever notice any of your own internal ableism?
Yeah.
Sure.
Let me think
I know
of an example.
Raven should be really good
Okay.
at this. Raven's like, and what's the problem?
I think I notice more of internal ableism with more intellectual disabilities because I've been exposed to it less.
That affects you in a certain way? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Rihanna didn't give any examples.
No, I know. I'm going back. I'm going back. This was all about an intervention for you.
That's what it feels like.
I remember growing up, it felt like when you saw someone with a disability, you were supposed to feel bad and sorry and sad, right? So the telethons. Y'all don't know about the telethons.
I don't.
I'm so aware about telephones.
Oh, okay. So that was a thing. What she said.
I don't feel bad at all.
The only time I do is like if they're not being accommodated properly.
Yeah.
Brianna, what about you? Anything around the internal ableism?
Yeah, anything for you?
Right now, I see like ableism in the way that like I approach neurodevelopmental disabilities or disorders. Sometimes I need to remind myself that we don't need to like fix it, especially with like a kid with like ADHD, because you get into this mindset, especially at the school. And I'm definitely not going to name drop that school, but they're very ableist in the sense of every behavior needs to be addressed, and they have to, display the behavior in a certain way. And that's where I see myself making sure that I step back and be like, we don't need to change this child. The curriculum needs to be adapted towards it. And school psych is pushing towards that message anyway. But I see myself being like, oh yeah, we got to do this and check in, check out, and behavioral modification. For real, I see it. Or like a kid with autism, we were just doing like trying to figure out an intervention for them. And I just had to sit back and be like, okay, we're not trying to fix this child. We're not going to try to change this child.
Another message around disability? Inspiration. As in, damn, if they could do it, what's my problem?
We interrupt this program for a special news bulletin.
That's not inspiration. That's just looking at someone as less than yourself. But no one ever gave me reason to question that way of thinking. In my episode with Andrew, we talked about an early experience he had at an NFB chapter meeting. That really brought back some memories for me, both as someone new to that environment and as someone who used to chair meetings of a local blindness organization. In the latter, I had many opportunities to observe the uncomfort of those attending a meeting for the first time. These folks assumed we were a support group, even though everything advertised about us was clear that we were a community advocacy organization working to increase access and opportunities for people with vision loss. That was literally what I would say, and not mention the word blind because it scared folks away. But when those unfamiliar with disability read people with vision loss or blind, I think their interpretation is, of course it's a support group. What else do those people need? During these meetings, we're talking about the business of advocacy. Meanwhile, those new to blindness are there in search of resources, maybe comfort, encouragement. I don't care if you're personally impacted or a family member or friend. There's something quite shocking about first encountering white canes, telescopic lenses, and anything else associated with blindness. Of course, there's nothing shocking about these things. But when you're in this position where you're facing a new normal, it's a lot to take in. Over time, I could recognize those who would return and those who were out of there. Occasionally, I think about them, the ones who ran away. I hope they found what they were looking for. I'm not necessarily saying that it was internal ableism that stopped them from connecting with our group. I just know that my internal ableism could have stopped me from connecting with people who truly made a difference in my life. Have you ever witnessed ableism in the real world that's outside of anything to do with your father?
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah,
so tell me something.
What?
Joking? Number one, Villanova, bro. That place,
Yeah,
man.
Villanova.
Not the place, but
No, the actual
no,
place.
yeah,
is
the
not
actual place.
accessible.
Okay, hold on. So the first thing is I'm gonna say is that a lot of the places on the campus, obviously they make accommodations, but a lot of the places on the campus they'll have like the disability stalls, but there's only stairs to get in. Another thing that drives me nuts is the people who think that they are so woke. I was told a story once, something about going into the big stall somewhere. And they were like, oh, I don't use those stalls because I realize those stalls are not for me. And I'm like, it pisses
so annoying.
me off. Because I'm like, how are they going to get in there? How are they going to get inside of the place if that's what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And it pissed me off because it's just this one-dimensional viewpoint where it's like, don't say a slur to someone. But it's so much more than that.
I've been around people with disabilities for a while. So I see it. I see it institutional heavily, like Raven was mentioning. Daily conversations. I'm thinking of things in like recreational therapy too. I saw a lot of ableism in that. A rec therapist is coming in and trying to make something accessible. So you're seeing how it's not accessible for everybody. Just a lot of times you go into a space and they're like, oh, this is what you can use. And it's like, well, we're going to need contractors because the people are not going to even be able to come in. If you take 2 seconds and put yourself in somebody else's shoes, even like a YMCA we went to and it wasn't accessible. Everyday living, we just had to create things, at least in my experience. And maybe that was just because we were students, so they weren't really taking us seriously, but you had to be very creative. It puts you in a mindset of like, wow, people who are just not included, you have to be so creative just to make sure that you're able to do what you need to do. In school psych, it's always like, well, my child looks normal. They seem normal. And I'm like, you know who's not normal? You.
I think also in a casual way, I notice it more. I think we're, as a society, starting to work on our language. But
yeah,
I notice that it's a little less with ability language.
Rihanna, let me ask you this, because what's the language that's used when it comes to disability in your line of work right now?
In school psychology?
Yeah. Do they use differently able? Do they use special needs? Do they say disability?
No, we say disability. And that's my huge argument over like semantics. Everybody's like don't get caught up with semantics, but that's when it's extremely important. If you describe a disability in a certain way, it can just put a picture in the parents' brains. And sometimes you just have to let that parent or teacher or whoever is uncomfortable be uncomfortable because it is what that child is, period.
It sounds like you're in the camp of, no, we're going to use the word disability. We're not going to change the language.
Yeah.
We're going to use those words.
No, I'm not making you comfortable with anything, especially when I'm making you comfortable within ignorance. I'm not doing that. I'm going to tell you your child has autism because there's nothing wrong with autism. The DSM-5 says what it is, and it is what it is.
I just noticed this in so taking psychopathology. And I've noticed a lot of the names of things have changed.
Yeah, like sociopath is antisocial personality.
There's like a lot that I've realized have changed.
And that's because of culture, though. The way that semantics comes into play and the way they become derogatory, and then we have to be sensitive, and that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the R word makes perfect sense why I'm not going to use it. There's some things, though, like obviously school psychs are not going to test if a child has quote unquote gender dysphoria, but I wouldn't approach a situation if a child tells me that they're non-conforming. I'm not going to say you have gender dysphoria. Like that's so stupid. And that's something that's becoming a little bit derogatory too. That's when I might change my wording, but that's because of a cultural aspect.
Sometime during my life, toilet paper became bathroom tissue. Sneakers became running shoes. Information became directory assistance. Car crashes became automobile accidents. Used cars became previously owned transportation. Room service became guest room dining. And constipation became occasional irregularity.
Now, thinking about the requirements for citizenship in the country of the blind, the truth is, I don't know if we have an immigration issue at all. I don't know anyone lining up trying to get in. The country of the blind, just like this podcast, has fully open borders. That being said, it is an opportunity to examine and challenge the way we move through the world to really figure out what blindness is and isn't, what disability is and isn't. Even more of an opportunity if you have people in your life who you love and love you back to share in the experience. Yes, these conversations can produce a range of emotions, but if you're lucky, it can just lead to strengthening the bonds as opposed to breaking them.
No, you told me.
Blindness,
that too.
disability is all a normal part of the
That's
human
what
experience,
Go ahead.
which I think works better when we're all in it together.
What was I talking about?
We were talking about grades, and I was like, some people.
Big shout out to Andrew Leland, author of The Country of the Blind. Remember, available on the NLS Bard for digital download and on Bookshare, as well as other places where you can purchase books. Rihanna and Raven, Daddy's babies. Let me tell you, hanging out with them is one of the biggest blessings of my life. Daddy loves you. Read My Mind Radio, Daddy loves you too. Read My Mind Radio is available wherever you get podcasts, transcripts, and more at readmymind.com. The only way to get there is by spelling it right.
R to the E I
D, and that's me in a place to be.
like my last name.
Peace.
Can we do shout outs?
Can we say bye?
You just said bye.
Not really.
Go ahead, say bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you for having us on Read My Mind Radio. Peace.
Peace. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Read My Mind Radio. I'm Rihanna Reed with my co-host Raven Reed taking over for this episode. Please follow us on Instagram. Mine is at Brianna Georgette. Raven, what's yours?
Mine's Raven Reed 22.
We love you. Thanks for listening. See you next week.
I liked it. That was awesome.
That was awesome. That was awesome.